So I want to give a warning here. Your mind was designed not to know the things I'm about to tell you. And that means I might be doing you harm by telling you things you were designed not to know.
You tend to think of yourself as the president, CEO, the one in charge of your own decision making. You're the one who gives the orders. But Robin's view is a little different. You're not the CEO, you're the press secretary.
Your conscious mind's main job is to watch what you're doing and construct a good story. It's a PR story. Your conscious mind is the PR director of your mind.
And as any good press secretary, the less you know about your true motives, the better.
A PR person does their job better if they don't actually know the real reasons, so that they can make a plausible alternative reason that they sincerely believe.
In today's episode of Ask the Expert, we're speaking with Robin Hanson, co-author of the book The Elephant in the Brain, as well as assistant professor at George Mason University. Your mind, he claims, is eager to show yourself a good view of who you are, even if it means distorting your entire reality to have you believe it.
You might think you want a guy who's very cooperative and caring for you, etc., but part of you inside might think that means he's not a good deal, because a man who had a really good negotiating position would not accept a deal like that.
This conversation is not necessarily a dark view of humans.
Evolutionary heritage wasn't that interested in you having a calm, enjoyable life. It cared about other things.
Just a brutally honest expose of the uncomfortable truths that we hide from others and often from ourselves.
It might be just to have self-respect, respect your friends. You have to keep pretending that you want a long-term relationship, even though you don't actually. You just like the series of short-term relationships, and that's all you actually want. Well, sorry, we've told you how hard the problem is. But maybe better forewarned and forearmed.
Welcome to another episode of Ask the Expert. Your central argument in The Elephant in the Brain hinges on the idea that humans are fundamentally self-deceived, right? We don't know our own motives, and in some cases, it's actually useful for us not to know our motives.
For humans, the social world was the main world that mattered. Around you are all these other rivals, but allies available. They're going to judge you on many aspects of your behavior. Your conscious mind, its job isn't to know what you're actually doing or even to be in control of what you're doing, but your conscious mind's main job is to watch what you're doing and construct a good story. It's a PR story. Your conscious mind is the PR director of your mind. It's not the president, it's not the king, it's not actually in charge. A PR person does their job better if they don't actually know the real reasons, so that they can make a plausible alternative reason that they sincerely believe.
I can understand the impetus to deceive others and make others feel like you are adhering to social norms. But you can know your motives, right? So why would evolution try to hide that from ourselves, our conscious mind?
If you have a house with a big building and walls and just one small door, then you can open the door just a little bit and push in and out what you want from the door while keeping the rest of the house protected. But your mind isn't like that. Your mind has all these different ways things could leak. So when you believe something or feel something, it expresses itself not just in your words, in the vocabulary, your tone of voice, your body language, how nervous you look, where your eyes look. You just are constantly leaking information through all these different channels about the things that are most important to you. It doesn't really work to consciously plan lies. Most of the way you plan what you say as words is unconscious. It's not actually something you're planning consciously through. So to be able to consciously say, this is what I believe, but this is what I'm going to say, that's actually quite hard. As you may know, actors are quite an unusual type of people. It's very hard to be a good actor. If you know the ordinary people around you who aspire to be actors and you see them act, you go, that's not very good.
Right.
Well, but why is it so hard to be an actor? Because it's hard to keep in mind one thing and actually show another. That's why the most effective acting is, I guess they call method acting, where you just get yourself to believe you are the character.
So I guess what you're saying is, as humans, we're terrible liars. And evolution understood that we are ill-equipped to conceal so much information. So best to conceal that from our conscious mind itself.
It's actually not a black and white, you either know it or you don't. There's a whole continuum in between of degrees of awareness of the extent to which you are not being entirely honest.
How does that show up? Like, how are we detecting that this may not be the entire truth? What does that feel like in our body?
Well, we often just notice inconsistencies in things we say or in do and say. we often notice that what we're saying sounds pretty good, maybe unbelievably good. We are just noticing various features of our actions and behavior. Look, we actually seem to be pretty good at noticing other people's hypocrisies. We're looking out for them all the time, and we're eager to point them out at our rivals. So, the same pattern matching thing that helps us notice them in our rivals does apply to ourselves. And so we do at times notice those, but we tend to push them aside, excuse them in order to maintain our optimistic stance about ourselves.
Bringing these insights to a dating context, how might another individual be deceiving me and about what?
So I want to give a warning here. Your mind was designed not to know the things I'm about to tell you.
Okay.
And that means I might be doing you harm by telling you things you were designed not to know. But fortunately, most humans are really quite capable of just forgetting stuff they don't want to hear. That's a capacity all of you have as well. So the structure in general is you have a behavior, you have a thing people say they're trying to do, then you have some puzzles, some ways that don't quite fit with that, and then you look for alternative explanations to explain the puzzles. Now, if we go to romance, we could say, why does it take so long to find somebody? I mean, that can't be that hard to find. Somebody who could be a companion or help you in a life. So it seems like people's pickiness is a bit puzzling, given if that were the goal. So another puzzle is people are often quite uncertain about their feelings. Say you pick up a piece of food and you eat it. Do you like it or not? People are usually pretty sure. It doesn't take very long to figure out whether you like some food. Even a movie, doesn't take that long to figure out whether you like the movie or not. But with romance, people seem to go for a long time trying, not being sure what they feel exactly. That's kind of a bit puzzling.
Yeah.
And then people have a checklist of features they want, and then they pick people who don't match the checklist very well. Well, you have this checklist, you believe in the checklist, why don't you just find somebody that meets it and then be done? But people often find someone who meets their checklist and they don't like them. They find somebody who doesn't meet the checklist and they do like them. That's a puzzle. People often get mad or upset that somebody else didn't do something they think would be an obvious sign of if you cared or you didn't care, you were serious, or etc. People seem to often be mismatched in terms of what kind of signals they're intending to give and expecting to receive. They often say, oh, this can't be right. He can't be serious because if he were, he would have done this thing and he didn't do this thing. So what is he thinking? But why would people be so mismatched on these cues?
Right. So how do we kind of reconcile these puzzles?
There's 3 steps here. First is to ask, what is the usual thing we say we're trying to do? Something like find a lifelong companion, raise kids together, have a life together, somebody you can trust, somebody who feels kind, somebody who will take care of you. And secondly, we'll find a set of puzzles that make sense there. And now the third step is to collect other theories that may not be quite so flattering theories, maybe theories that you wouldn't want to admit to if it were true, as alternative explanations for your behavior. And then we're going to ask which of these alternative explanations best fit the puzzles. So the 4th step is to do the matching between the different alternative theories and the various puzzles. So we could say your evolutionary heritage wasn't that interested in you having a calm, enjoyable life. It cared about other things, right? So it wanted you to have a high quality mate, good genes, good resources, well respected socially, powerful, maybe able to get their way in the world. Your genes might have wanted you to get that, even if it was a tumultuous, problematic relationship. You might not want an unequal relationship, but maybe you want a relationship where you're more in control, you're the powerful person, and they will submit to your demands. That might be something that you underlyingly actually want. Maybe you want high status in your world, and people around you have an opinion about the kind of people you date and what status that gives on you. If you date a movie star or a rich person or something, they would think if you picked somebody too early, whoever it was, then they would look down on you as having settled too early because, hey, if you had waited longer, maybe you could have had a better choice. Or if you leave their social world, they won't respect you so much, and you want to stay in their social world, so you want to stay playing the game for a while, dating people, bringing impressive guys around on your arm, and that they'll be nod and be impressed by, and you want to just impress them with a repeated show of all the guys you can attract. That might also be something you want. But even farther down, we could say, what if you want to get a guy locked onto you, but you not so locked onto him, so you have more options? Maybe even you want to cheat on him, or maybe you want to, when it's convenient, dump him for somebody better when somebody better comes along. Those might be things that under inside you wants to do, but you yourself would be horrified by that sort of uncaring attitude toward people, that you want to use them for what they're useful to you and then swap them out when somebody better comes along.
It's down to my identity a little bit. I'm not ready to digest or accept that I'm the kind of person who would do something like that.
Your being unaware of your feelings can cover for that, you see.
Yeah.
Right?
These uncomfortable, unflattering truths about who I really am or why I really am choosing certain things.
Right. I mean, another thing is you're negotiating with people, in essence, over not only who you're going to have a relationship, but the terms of the relationship. And so often, if your negotiating stance was very clear, that's often a negotiating disadvantage.
Yeah.
In a negotiation, if the other side knows exactly what you will accept and when you will walk, they will move you up right up to the line of where you will walk and give you just a little bit more than that, but not much more than what it would take to keep you to stay. But if they're uncertain about what it would take for you to stay, now they face a risk and they will pick some intermediate point where there's only a modest chance that that will not be enough for you. And then at that point, you might get a big surplus in the relationship, i.e. you would have been willing to stay for a lot less, but they didn't know that, so you got a better deal. This is a common feature of negotiations all through the economy.
So what does one do then?
You might think you want a guy who's very cooperative and caring for you, etc., but part of you inside might think that means he's not a good deal, because a man who had a really good negotiating position would not accept a deal like that. And a man who would be demanding of you and maybe not settle for you very easily might be the sort of man you would then respect. So a man who, is very, asks a lot of you and isn't that considerate of you, you might then estimate his market value to be high, and that might make you all the more eager to get him on board, right? Sure. Whereas a man who's very cooperative and attentive and solicitous and eager to please, you might think, well, he can't have a very good market value if he's willing to do that for me.
And what about the other puzzle that, people have, like a really strict checklist of, I want A, B, C, right, D, E qualities in a partner, and then go ahead and make a completely different choice? So
the things on the checklist do tend to be things that you're allowed to say you want. Right. But if you just want a guy who's hot, a guy who's powerful, a guy who everybody else wants, that's not usually on the checklist, right? But if that's
because
what you really want,
it violates social norms to explicitly express that.
Right. It's not your self-image. And it also will not help you in negotiations with him. You see, if you just admit to him, I like you because you're hot, he'll say, fine, let's just have sex, but not do anything else. And you say, then you want to sort of hook him into relationships. So you need to be pretending that, no, I want you in a relationship. I'm just doing this other thing, because it's okay. But like, I have these other priorities. So your negotiation intention of getting him into a long-term relationship with you, you need to be taking the stance that the long-term relationship features are the thing you really want. This is a basic issue of long versus short-term relationships. Yeah. Many people do like short-term relationships, and they also want a long-term relationship, but they might not be honest about the priorities here. Like if a man just wants a series of short-term relationships, he might be open to a long-term relationship, but to the extent he shows he's open, that might be problem in these things. So he might just pretend he's not at all open to a long-term relationship. And similarly, if you are trying to get him into a long-term relationship, you might want to take the stance that the short-term stuff is not much value to you because you're mainly interested in the long one, even if the short-term stuff is of value to you. Or it might be just to have self-respect and respect to your friends, you have to keep pretending that you want a long-term relationship, even though you don't actually. You just like the series of short-term relationships, and that's all you actually want. Right. But you might not. It might be okay to say that to yourself or other people. That
speaks to how integral our self-image is, and how as social norms evolve, our acceptance of our own motives changes.
A good key reference point is to realize that your internal basic, desires are pretty standard human issue. But different human societies have had different norms and status markers, et cetera, then that produces very different romantic worlds. But important thing to realize is that for maybe a million years, your ancestors typically lived in groups of like 30 to 50 people, and they only ever met 150 people in their lifetime of all possible ages and genders. And that's the degree of pickiness they could afford. If you think of how many of them are near my age out of a group of 50 people of all ages and genders, it's a pretty small, limited group, right? 5, 10 at the most. That's who you're picking among. And most people in human history picked one of those people and had an okay life, right? Also, I mean, in this forager world, in fact, long ago, people didn't have lifelong monogamy. They had a relationship for 5-7 years sort of thing and switched around. That's what was most of human history. And then the farming era, 10,000 years ago, we started to have this monogamy thing, which has many advantages, but it also is in somewhat tension with human nature. So to the extent that we reduce the social pressures for monogamy, we will drift back into the 5-7 year relationship pattern that humans were in. And now you have to ask, is that going to go okay here? Because that's what we'll more naturally drift back into, because that was the way things typically were.
Right.
But they had short-term relationships, but again, from those 10 people, right?
We probably live longer now than we used to as well. So I mean,
absolutely,
the duration of time spent with a partner was probably less.
In our world today, one of the first questions is, are they going to be open to a long-term relationship? So you have to decide, am I having practice relationships here or just enjoying short-term relationships, or am I ready for a long-term relationship? But even if you're ready, if the people around you aren't ready, it's not going to work very well. So that's a way in which the world together switches their romantic style, and you're part of that world, and it's hard to deviate. So even if you think, oh, we're making a mistake here waiting too long to get to have long-term relationships, you'll still say, oh, if I happen to be young now and I realize this, I shouldn't wait so long, but it's going to be hard for me to find a partner now because all these other people aren't expecting that. And so I'll have a smaller pool of people to choose from if I'm going to choose somebody interested in that. And then many people might pretend to be interested in that because they like me, even if they aren't. And how will I tell who's really interested in that? Now you're facing a harder problem. For
fear that the dwindling pool will make it much harder later on. So I'll just go ahead and say right now that I want a long-term relationship, even though I don't.
Well, somebody else might. I was just assuming you decided you did, but you would still face a problem finding somebody else. But it could also be that you actually don't want it. That is, you think you do, but it's awful tempting to have these short-term relationships with all these people who flatter you and make you look good and popular. Even if you try to have a long-term relationship, there'll be all these people around to tempt you away because the world around you isn't that monogamous, you see. So that's why it's just generally hard to deviate from your social world's standard pattern, because you're part of a world.
So what do I do? How do I predict that a relationship will be successful based on all these different variables?
The thing that's the most important to understand about, say, romance and mating is just, this is deeply embedded in you. You would like the feeling of control, that you could have a plan about this and know what you're about and like control things, because there's lots of ways in which if you're out of control, this can go bad. But you just actually can't be that much in control. There's this complicated thing inside you that will decide what you like and don't like. And it will reveal itself to you to some degree when it wants to. And your checklist is not going to have much power against that. So you'll have to do this very hard thing of exposing yourself to lots of people. But the main thing that you should realize is evolution put enormous skills and capacities and heuristics about how to deal with this, right? Because all of your ancestors had to make good choices about this. You have a lot of machinery inside you to help you with this, but most of that machinery was designed for a different world that you're in. You didn't have that many choices. Your relationships weren't going to last that long, and your life wasn't going to last that long. I'm afraid this is just a hard problem.
Right.
But you don't actually have as much control over it as you think anyway. That's the main thing you should realize. From the point of view of the elephant in the brain, the first point is to realize your preferences inside you are just not the checklist that you would like to think you want. You might just want things that you don't think you should want. You'll have to come to some compromise with that. You don't have to let that entirely win, but you can't just entirely suppress it either.
Yeah.
You need to compromise in some degree.
That's a tricky one, naturally, I think, to help the limbic mind and the sort of prefrontal come to an agreement is challenging. And sometimes one has to give up over the other. Like, you sometimes have to give up on the sparks or the butterflies or the attraction or that intensity that you feel with exactly the wrong person who exhibits the negative qualities of your primary caregiver sometimes, and bring a more long-term view of it in the interest of, hey, maybe this is of higher value to me at this time. What role does maturity and age play in this decision? Is it more advisable to enter a partnership like this before you have fully solidified as a human? Or is it more wise to first know who you are as much as to the extent that you can and understand the middle ground between your ideals and your drives before making a decision?
There's two sort of standards of evaluation that I'd like to highlight for you of a question like this. I mean, this is a question about, which norm is better. And the usual way we answer the question about which norm is better is we go to our meta-norms, right? So in the meta-norm in our society is typically what would give you a more satisfying life in terms of being proud of yourself and, enjoying your life. That's the meta-norm we have about how to choose between these. And that's probably been invoking that meta-norm is probably what did induce the change somewhat from the cornerstone marriage or relationship where you come together not fully formed or knowing who you are and then figure that out together versus finding yourself first and then forming a relationship. Now, I did the cornerstone thing, so I got to say, I don't think it's so bad. You get to start earlier in life and then you get to have a partner during the time where you're figuring out who you are rather than having to do that all by yourself. But there's a different standard of evaluation that I've been focused on lately, which is just cultural evolution. Will your society survive or will it go away? And just because you do everything right according to your society's meta-norms of giving yourself fulfilling lives and self-respect doesn't mean your society will survive. Mm-hmm. We do have a fertility problem in the sense that most of the world is below replacement. Even India is now below replacement. And the proximate causes of this are a number of cultural trends, including this switch from cornerstone to capstone marriage norms. And the net effect of these various cultural changes is to put fertility below replacement, and it plausibly will stay there, and our society will just decline over the coming centuries to be replaced by others with very different cultural norms. Mm-hmm. If you're okay with that, fine, let your society decline away in elegant sophistication and comfort. Or you can ask, how do I want some part of the society that I'm in to not suffer that? And therefore, we'll need to change somehow, including on something like cornerstone to capstone marriage, regardless of how well it makes me happy or respected or whatever in life. If it means our civilization goes down, maybe you want to make some changes. But you can see that's a very hard trade-off. Mm-hmm. It's a much grander issue than we've been talking about so far. It's just, what do you want in your relationship? It's about, does civilization continue? This is an important thing to notice. Romance and mating has been changing a lot, not only over a million years, but over 100 years. Mm-hmm. And most of those changes people liked at the time, or that many people advocated for. They had strong reasons they gave for them. But in terms of cultural adaptiveness, we didn't have any particularly good reason to think these were adaptive changes, which means more likely they were maladaptive, more likely meaning that the culture is going to decline as a result of all these changes, which weren't very well considered from the point of view of adaptation.
Maybe. I suppose people, as our culture was drifting towards older relationships, maybe they recognized that maybe an 18, 19, 20-year-old wasn't equipped to make the best decision for their life partner, unless you're claiming that they are, to have a long-term relationship, not in today's day and age where people do live long and they are surrounded by temptation. So I think that maybe is where it came from, and they felt it was adaptive.
You have to realize through almost all human history, most people made it at a pretty young age.
Yeah.
Like 16, 18 sort of age. Yeah. Maybe most humans didn't have as satisfying a life as you're going to have now, waiting till 28 to choose your partner. But their civilization grew and gave rise to yours, whereas yours is going to go away. And therefore, the future will be descended from something else than your habits, because the future is descended from people whose habits make a population that grows.
Like a paradox, because if my ideals tell me that I should, that I will have children later, or maybe not at all, or have many fewer children, then that thought process would go on to my children, but eventually dwindle out.
Right. So, but you might say, how is it that I was given a habit to trust that doesn't work? Right. So something has gone wrong with the evolutionary process in order for you to even be in this situation.
Right.
Because it makes sense to think, look, the fact that I exist should be evidence that my intuitions and habits aren't crazy. Crazy habits and intuitions would have gone away. Right. So I'm here, I have them. Therefore, this must be an okay habit to intuition. And that would work on average at a random point in history. It just doesn't work now because you're at an unusual point in history where we did an unusual thing over the last few centuries.
And now I'm trying really hard to override my programming because my environment is so different. than what I was supposed to. And like, where does dating apps and matchmaking platforms and the digitization of dating play into this? Because technology's really penetrated this world.
But certainly one thing that's happened is that you used to hang around people socially and get a feeling of who you liked. And now you're getting this initial feeling who you like based on a app image and, description. And so that's more going into your head about what description you think you want. Yeah. And separately, just more reacting to like, are they handsome or something? And they're not so much reacting to the social context of like, are they nice to people around them? Do they have a connection to my family? Do they go to church where I go? Right. If you were going to meet somebody in a social context, the fact that they're in that context and how they behave in that context are clues that you can use to decide who to trust and who you might like. But on the apps, you don't have those cues, so you're not using them. So you are now choosing people more on the basis of a checklist of features and just, are they hot? Exactly. Right? You don't have a list of their previous relationships and testimonies from those, right? You don't have a list of their, are they nice to their friends? Those are the things you might hear about somebody in your social world.
You're stripped of so much data that you'd otherwise have if you'd met them in a social setting.
Right.
And even the fact of them being in your social context is data, right? Okay, they, we're in the same area, meeting somebody all the way across the world who has no connection to my community, to my, like you said, my church or my friend circle. It's so much harder to evaluate your potential to collaborate on life together.
When teachers have an attractive student in their class, in the physical class, they get higher grades, but not if they see them on Zoom. So apparently seeing an attractive person in your Zoom classroom doesn't have the same impact on you as they're being in person.
That's so interesting.
I mean, that's just showing that being in person just has all these cues you're getting from them that you're not getting even on a video screen. But most of these apps are not video, they're just a still image.
Right. And even if you do video call, you're saying your body or your subconscious mind is lacking some really key body language cues, or even other chemical cues, right? Like pheromones and different interactions
or
that
cues
you have
about other people. Like when you're in a room with people, you not only see them, you see other people looking at them or reacting to them.
And we're constantly subconsciously processing all this data that we, that's what kind of accumulates to our intuition about somebody, right? And you're just
that's all this machinery I was talking about. You have inherited a million years worth of machinery to deal with this issue, but you're not letting most of the machinery work.
So, I mean, I guess my takeaway from all of this is to try to meet them in person as soon as you possibly can before making a decision about them, and maybe meeting more people than you might think, just so that you can genuinely give yourself a chance to feel how you feel in their presence.
Or go to a meetup where there's just a lot of people all at once in the same room. Yeah. That's one of the fundamental problems in the world today, is that in the past, people were just more socially pressured to socialize. Mm-hmm. And now people feel shy. I mean, they are shy about socializing, but in the past, you just had to get over it. And otherwise you were pretty shamed. And now
otherwise you wouldn't be able to.
We let you stay shy for a lot longer and don't shame you so much about it. And that means you're just not getting out there meeting as many people. And that's a problem.
And I did want to mention flirting, because it is something which is maybe deliberately ambiguous from an evolutionary point of view, because you don't want to risk rejection, and that would be embarrassing from a social norm POV.
Flirting is often something that the people involved aren't sure is going on, but maybe older people are pretty sure it's going on. But now if they can complain about it, now they squash it, and now people are afraid to do anything that might look like flirting in many contexts, because people have this idea that flirting is only appropriate in certain sort of social contexts, and we keep cutting away the context where people think it's inappropriate to flirt.
And even if it is an appropriate context, people still don't want to be perceived as creeps, right? If I'm not someone that she might like, then I'm going to be, like you said, canceled or something. So it's now people want so much certainty that yes, she likes me or he likes me before I even go up to start flirting.
Traditionally, she did give the first hints that it might be okay for him to flirt with her, but now she's less sure she should be giving some hints, because she's going to be shamed by her associates for being too flirty.
Or maybe even shamed by herself. right? If
Right.
that is part of the self-image that she has.
So a key thing that happened in the world is our spaces got bigger. So, once upon a time, when people lived in a small hovel, not only were there no hallways or even doors between the rooms, but everybody slept in one big bed. But as we get more space, we get to be more away from each other. And many young people love to have their own apartment. They don't share an apartment or condo. That means they're just not meeting so many people that way. If you share an apartment, if you even share a large workspace, if you were in a dense apartment complex with lots of people, you met all the time on the stairways, you would just be meeting a lot of people. So our drive for solitude in the past was just squashed by poverty. And now we can have as much solitude as we wanted, which in the moment feels great. But it has this long-term consequence of less socialization.
We're very comfortable hiding behind screens and texting many times. Like, anyone can be incredibly funny and charming and, charismatic when you have like 5 minutes to think about your answer. But I think when you're actually in a real life setting with someone, I don't know that young people growing up nowadays are as skilled or adept with that.
So a separate trend is that when you have sort of unusual personality quirks or anxieties or whatever, in the past, you were just much more shamed for that and sort of slapped and told to get over it. And now we're much more indulgent of, if you're especially shy or anxious or whatever, your parents are more going to just, let you have a little extra time or space. If you need a year off between college and starting work, come stay with us, right? That sort of indulgence is comforting in the moment, and it fits our usual norms of parents should be like very attentive to their children and indulgent and helpful. But in some sense, it could just let you linger too long, because often the way people got over these things in the past was a rough slap and shame and being just forced to do something you didn't feel like doing. And then you just did it, and eventually it became okay.
Perhaps gentle parenting was maybe detrimental in the long term.
We've really prioritized safety and sort of good feelings in the moment. And, our society is really organized around making sure nobody ever feels shamed or insulted or uncomfortable, ever has to sort of put up with some emotional pain or social sanction. We've really tried to go very far, minimizing all of that.
Arranged marriage in India has, kind of comparable satisfaction levels to quote unquote love marriages.
It does.
And what does that imply about how much choice and agency we think matters in having a healthy marriage? A strong
modern change and norm is the norm of a romantic marriage and individual choice. That's a great many stories of the modern era are about the switch between the old norm and the new norm about that. Say Romeo and Juliet, for example, about the parents have their agendas and then the kids make a choice different from what the parents would have chosen. We're celebrating the kids making their own choice and following their romantic inclinations. And even if it leads to disaster, in the past, romance wasn't that important an aspect of marriage. And often in the ancient world, the idea that you would have fallen in love was something to be lamented because it probably meant pretty bad things were going to happen to you.
But why would evolution encode falling in love if it usually meant bad outcomes?
But as you noted, our studies of arranged marriages show that, marriage satisfaction in the long run seems to be just as high there as without. But most of the world would be ashamed to have an arranged marriage. Just like most of the world would be ashamed to live under a monarchy rather than a democracy. It's not like their lives are actually changed that much by being in a democracy, but their self-concept is really tied to, if they're in a democracy, they have self-respect and they are a person with autonomy, whereas if they're in a monarchy, then they're just a subject dominated by the king or something, right? And the same way for romance.
What I've understood is that arranged marriage, or like the concept of it, probably worked because so many more factors and variables were taken into account, practicalities that would translate into like long-term compatibility that maybe you aren't considering at the moment where you're quote unquote falling in love.
Young people are not paying attention to a bunch of things they can't really pay attention to because they just don't have enough life experience to do so. Yeah. And their parents are more up to noticing what family this person comes from, what career they're likely to have, what they've heard about their behavior and what that implies for what they'll be like when they're older and all sorts of things that parents can know about a person that the children just can't. So, but obviously, the ideal in the past was a mixed initiative here where the parents were formally able to choose, but they cared about their kids and very much listened to their children's lobbying. And that had a similar effect, right?
Thank you so very much. Are there any points that you wanted to mention that we weren't able to cover yet?
Good luck to all of our listeners. I presume since they're listening to your podcast, they're probably somewhat in the romance market. So we're sorry we've told you how hard the problem is. But maybe better forewarned and forearmed.
Yes.